Hi guys, how you doing today? This is D Durrell with D Durrell Life Solutions. Today what I'm going to talk about is domestic violence in the black community. Now, in my presentation today as I dialogue with you, I plan to talk about it as it relates to the male side of domestic violence, either being a perpetrator or a victim, or we're going to also look at it from the female perspective, being the victim and also in some instances the perpetrator. Now, overall, domestic violence in the black community is perceived a little bit different, and it presents itself in many ways differently than in other cultures. Although for the most part, domestic violence is domestic violence, and it involves one person dictating, exploiting, and imposing their will, or doing things that can physically harm or kill someone. This is pretty much on all layers, no matter what race, culture, age, is pretty much consistent with any form of domestic violence abuse. But in the black community, I'm going to touch upon issues as it relates to contacting the police. I'm going to talk about issues in how a lot of black women repetitively make excuses to continue this relationship. And I'm going to end this relationship whether it's with a black male or even female, because as we know in most recent statistics, lesbian relationships are, to me, the fastest growing population of domestic abuse or domestic violence, particularly with females. Now, let's touch on talking about, as we talk about receiving help, contacting someone to help us, contacting one to provide safety. The black community, and is well documented, has always had anxiety and always had skepticism in contacting law enforcement to resolve domestic disagreements. And we all know that the way black people or African Americans are perceived initially has a negative connotation to it, in which there's an automatic sense of hypervigilance from the police or law enforcement in handling our issues. For example, you can watch in reality like television, such as Cops and other law enforcement type, First 48 and so forth. You see a difference in the manner in which African Americans are approached by the police, the way they're talked to, the communication, the decorum, the willingness for the police to hear them out, as opposed to dealing with African Americans, in which you don't get that type of privilege. So one of the reasons, particularly when we're talking about females, black women, is because when they contact the police, number one, they're perceived as also being criminal. They're perceived not as being the victim. They also are seen as over exaggerating. Black women are seen in a negative way. And also, the fact of the matter is that the black woman who has been victimized doesn't want their partner or mate to be hurt or potentially killed. And as we all know, when we're dealing with domestic violence issues in the black community, when you contact the police, we understand that these are the events that could happen. There's a high probability that something negative can happen to innocent people, or the use of excessive force in the process, instead of the police coming in to resolve or calm down an issue. We also want to understand that in the black community, domestic violence has always been seen as a part of you mind your own business. Due to our ability to try to stay away, and we've learned these survival skills of staying afloat, we've always learned to stay out of other people's business. And when you have the mindset of staying out of other people's business, the victim is less likely to ask you to get into their business. So in many instances, a victim is highly likely not to seek for help. And if they do seek for help, there's many instances in which the advice that they're given is in many ways structured in a manner to encourage the victim to work things out, to encourage the victim to pray, to encourage the victim to do what your man says, or to encourage the victim to continue being abused. There's never an offer of refuge. There's never an offer of financial assistance so that this person can live on their own or live independently so that they don't have to engage in this behavior daily. These are facts. This is what the black community, this is how the black community functions, whether it's a friend or family member. And overwhelmingly, these are females, particularly young females, who encounter domestic violence. Also, when we look at the nuances of the black community dealing with domestic violence, in many cases, the mother of the African American male that has subjected his female, his woman or his wife, is probably going to take up and support her son no matter what, unconditionally. Not in most cases, but in a lot of cases. There are many times in which that female may reach out to the African American, her boyfriend or husband's mother, and the mother is going to be in defense of her son. And to me, what saddens me is that there are African American mothers who have been subjected to domestic violence themselves, who in situations because their son learned that from their father or whomever that did that to them, will basically give advice to the current victim, their son's mate, to take the same type of treatment. You see the pathology, the generational pathology from one generation to another, the mindset that this type of dysfunctional behavior is just part of being in a relationship. You see, this is what domestic violence looks like in the black community, in which the victim, in many ways, is not respected, lack of empathy, lack of support, lack of moral support, lack of financial support, lack of options, but also the lack of solutions. Now, I'm going to talk about this topic a lot because right now I'm currently working on a certification and an accreditation of a program in which I'm going to be providing domestic violence